Okay, welcome to our first ever Asking for a Friend event. I'm Andy Wright. I am the founder of Never Not Creative. I also help co-chair the Mentally Healthy Change Group and run a software business called Streamtime. And I've been in the industry across lots of different agencies over the years. And this initiative is the result of a collaboration between Never Not Creative, Young Bloods, and Mentally Healthy. And it exists because we wanted to create a safe place for where you can ask the unaskable. So the questions that you're worried about may change the way that people treat you at work or affect the opportunities that might be given to you. And it's really come out of lots of different events that we started to run last year, and understanding the seriousness and the weight of some of the questions that we were being asked when we were putting panels together. So we're bringing together industry leaders, mental health professionals, to give you non-judgmental responses in a safe and anonymous environment. So before I introduce our guests, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So the way that we're going to use this software is that you should see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a few tabs. So chat and questions and polls, and in the questions tab, unsurprisingly, is where you ask questions. So please do go and ask your questions in that tab. And if you have thoughts, comments, ideas, general agreement, thanks to give to our guests, then please just add those into the chat. A caveat, so everything that we do with Never Not Creative and Mentally Healthy is volunteer run and I guess essentially unofficial. So we're a bunch of people using community to come together and tackle the challenges that our industry is facing. So with that in mind, anything you hear today is really passionate people lending a point of view. And we don't know the context of your questions. We don't know who you are, but hopefully the advice you do get is something to consider as you sort of seek other help as well around talking to others or professionals. Obviously, Katie, who's here, I'll introduce in a second, is a professional psychotherapist. And if things are getting very serious for you, you should absolutely seek professional help. So whether that's financial, legal, or indeed mental health related. And finally, since launching this, Monday, I think we launched it, the response has been overwhelming. So I can tell you, because I did ask for questions beforehand, that we've had enough questions sent in that we could probably keep this going till about 8 p.m. at night. So here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to tackle a few themes that have emerged out of the questions that have come in first. So we'll spend the first 15 to 20 minutes just tackling some of those. They may address some of the questions that you have coming up. But also, we'll be, after sort of 15 to 20 minutes, we'll be jumping into the questions that do come up in the tab on the right there. After the session, because I'm very conscious of all of the things that will come up, we'll post the recording. We'll also do our best to add a sort of basic level of response to other questions that might not have got tackled during the session, and we'll get that up onto the Never Not Creative site early next week. So that was a lot of stuff. Let's get started. I'm going to say welcome to Maria and Katie. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Maria is an executive creative director from Colenso, BBDO in New Zealand. She's also worked all over the world, been awarded for pretty much everything. Very passionate about mental health in our industry, and I'm really glad that we got to meet late last year, and that we're probably going to do a lot more things together in the future, which is great. Katie knows our industry really well, having worked in it for a number of years in various media roles. She now also splits her time between working at Unlimited, which is a huge partner of us at Never Not Creative and Mentally Healthy, and also starting her own psychotherapy practice. So that is a lot of stuff to get through, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm getting some amazing notifications going on, so I'll try and find a way to silence that shortly. But yes, thank you everyone for saying hello. Awesome to have you here. So all of the questions that came in were incredible, so thank you very much for sending those in. And I've tried to split them into themes so that we can sort of tackle a few at once as we go through. And so I'm going to start with this one, which funnily enough, Maria, got directed straight to you. And this is sort of in the theme of getting a job, future of the industry. Of course, things are a little uncertain, a lot uncertain right now. And so I'm going to read this one out, and then we can tackle it. So, hey Maria, friend of mine has wanted to work at a certain agency for years, and recently they managed to land a job offer, but because of the pandemic, that offer was cancelled. While they understand it's not personal, and while the agency was incredibly kind about the way they handled cancelling the offer, I can tell my friend is a bit burnt out by the way things ended up. So I was wondering, as someone who's worked in the industry for a while, do you have any advice for a young creative experiencing a very unexpected career setback? I'd love to pass it on as we ask for a friend.
Yes. I think there's two things there. So the first thing is that I have a certain level of optimism still about where things are going to go in the next sort of 3 to 6 months. Obviously, it's unprecedented these times, so it's hard to kind of know where agencies will end up, how much we will be affected. But I think there's every chance that in 3 to 6 months we'll all be cranking and trying to rebuild after a sort of a period of, I guess, not so much work going through the agency. So if your friend, was obviously liked and respected by that agency, I think that's fantastic. That's kind of half the battle. That agency will not forget those people or that person. And I would say there's every chance that once the agency gets back up on its feet again, that will be one of the first phone calls they make. So all is not lost. I think it would be great to sort of, I guess, remain somewhat optimistic about the future of the industry. We totally don't know where things are going with the current situation, but let's assume the best at this stage, and let's be sort of preparing for that point in time where we are all kind of back rebuilding brands and rebuilding businesses and doing what we do best.
Mm. So and how, what is it that's sort of driven you to think and feel that way? Because one of the other sort of questions in this was, people are losing work right now. Some already have. How do we stay positive about the chances of future employment when you're certainly feeling a bit disheartened? Is there anything that, obviously you're in a great big agency right now, and it must be very disheartening and to look at things like that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversations I've had that are disheartening, but there's probably more that have been encouraging. Mm-hmm. Talking with sort of members of senior leadership teams in some of our big companies here in New Zealand, there is a certain level of optimism, and there's a desire to get back on our feet and rebuild and be creative as quickly as we can. And I really enjoy that perspective. I think, especially as a creative person, like trying to find the optimism in every situation really helps me personally, in terms of my creativity. As soon as I kind of slide into a negative headspace, it is harder for me personally to be creative. So, look, we don't know where things are going. None of us do, but I do think it's important to try and remain optimistic.
And I guess, we are all in the same boat. It's not like, some are necessarily winning. We're all pretty much affected in the same way.
That's right.
So actually what we might do, because I think that might be a good time to bring you in, Kate, is we had another theme around positivity. And how do you stay positive during a time like this from a kind of mental health perspective, also at a time when you're isolated from people. So do you have any other tips around that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say that came up in me when I heard that question is, the man or woman who lost their job is going to feel disappointed. And I think that the full spectrum of human emotion is welcome at all points in life, and especially so now. And actually, you do need to hold yourself with a bit of compassion, because against this current backdrop, feelings such as, fear and insecurity, uncertainty, some of these more murky aspects of self will be presenting more regularly. So for me, the ambition is not that you feel positive all the time. I think in the times when you do feel positive, that will really take care of itself. when you don't feel that way, your expectation of yourself in the immediacy of that moment is not to convert straight to positivity, but just to be able to hold yourself steady in that discomfort and access whatever tools you do use to help bring yourself back into regulation. So we are still allowed out if that is exercise, if that is meditation, if that is whatever expression it is, if it is just watching a movie to distract yourself. So then you can come back, because it's once that has passed, then you will more readily be able to access that positivity that you seek. But I think there's a point in the middle, which is the point, the stillness point, where one dissipates and then the other begins. And you need to make space for holding that. You can't short circuit it.
Maybe that's a good point, Katie. Maybe it's a good place to sort of start talking about some of those tools that, like there's a spectrum of them, isn't there, in terms of things that take a little more commitment, like daily meditation, to, simpler techniques like getting out of your head and into your body in terms of exercise or walking. Are there any other like simple things that can help if you're trying to break out of that headspace?
Look, there's a lot. Your ambition is, just to say, the ambition is to take this thing that is previously hidden from you, that is charged, that says, I am this thing, to being able to see, I am experiencing this thing. And that's called object relativity. So what was hidden from you is now in front of you. So you can say, I am feeling anxious, I am feeling depressed, I am feeling this way, but I am not that thing. And so what you want to do is create this space, whatever it is that will best hold you in it. Breath work is really important, because quite often charged feelings are housed in the body. So anything you can do to bring your nervous system down, so slowing your breath. Moving is really important. Changing the backdrop. So even if that's just go into a different room, if you can't actually go out. Stay hydrated, listening to positive music, reading something. What you consume isn't just what you eat, it's what you listen to, it's what you read, it's who you speak to. So, and also who you have these conversations with. Don't phone that friend that's going to kind of draw you into the narrative of how to catastrophize everything. Journal or speak to that friend who's going to listen to you, but help you hold it in a place of neutrality and give it a bit more balance.
That's good advice. Yeah. I think for me, one of the things that seems to short circuit me into a good space quite quickly is singing. Not something I'm particularly good at. My husband's really good at it, but I know that that's my one little trick if I need to kind of like change my headspace quite quickly. I guess it's doing something I truly, truly love. So I guess those things are quite personal sometimes, aren't they, in terms of your little tools that can help you?
Well, what I love about what you've just said is the simplicity of it. You basically said, if I want to feel joyous, I do things that give me joy. And so by definition, the three of us here would have three completely different things, and the 71 people on the call would have 71 different things. So actually, maybe the ambition is connecting to joy. What brings me joy, and do that.
Awesome.
So how do we cope during isolation? And I think this one's a really interesting one, because there is a very specific question around this. And I think this also crosses the boundaries between work and personal life as well, which I think we're all having to blur at the moment, depending on who we live with, because suddenly we're stuck in with them 24 hours a day. So this question is around working from home, with a partner being there as well, who is also, I think, turning to smoking certain substances to sort of cope with that, something that's been a bit of a bugbear in their relationship before. And they've had the discussion before, they've agreed to try and find a way around it. So a bit of a challenge where one does exercise and the other one does less smoking. But obviously, time right now is becoming even more pressured. So how can this person bring up the fact that this is really bothering them, and what can they do about it? Is it something around sort of setting boundaries? What's the best way to approach this?
Well, yeah, it's absolutely around setting boundaries. And so the nature of conflict, if I call it that in this case, there are two ways that we could go in. One is to pass judgment on or try and make an assumption about whether that behavior outside of yourself is right or wrong. The other is for you to essentially turn the eye inward and become really connected to what you need. And boundaries are, by definition, a line, a barrier. And what they do is they protect us physically, emotionally, and mentally from either giving too much of ourselves out or from allowing things in which are toxic to us, which harm us. So I would say to this individual that their job is really to become a witness to what is unfolding for them in that moment. And if they are feeling more often than not frustrated or anxious or in conflict with this person, that it is up to them to hold their own integral boundaries, to know what behavior is or isn't okay in work or out of work. All they can do is communicate that to the person that they're in conflict with, and then he or she may choose to meet them there or may not. I can tell you pretty much what you can't do with guarantee is change somebody else's behavior. But what you can do is make active choice about what serves you. So my sense from this question is that this isn't serving you because it's not making you happy, because it's actually motivated you to reach out to us as a group. And my guess would be others to say, what shall I do about this thing? And again, we can't tell you what to do. All we can tell you to do is to connect in with what you need as an individual. And if this partner isn't meeting that, then there's information there and you can make a choice about how you act accordingly.
Excellent. Our next theme is a tough one right now because it's about trying to break into a team and becoming sort of more and more part of a team. And there's sort of two questions around this. So one is about, a new role, and the other one is around the sort of perhaps team dynamics that have come into play. So I'll do the first one first. So I'm newish at an agency and the people in my department are really close. Individually, they're great to talk to, but as a group, they feel kind of cliquey. I know they don't do it on purpose, but there's a lot of in-jokes and I often feel left out. How can I break into the friendship group?
Who should tackle that one? Do you want to have a go, Brie, or shall I?
Yeah, I can have a go. I mean, look, I'm no expert in making friends, but no. But I think one thing one thing I like to try and always do is be myself, be authentic at all costs. And I guess the result of that might mean that some people don't necessarily appreciate you, like you, if you like, or you can't fit in with that group. But I suppose it's just about having the confidence in that situation to be comfortable with who you are, and I guess a little less concerned with whether you're part of that group or not. As long as you're being true to yourself, that's sort of personally what I find more fulfilling. I think that might be my age, partly as well.
I love that. And think about how exhausting would it be if you had to pretend to be something else so that they liked you, and then you had to keep pretending to be that thing every day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks of the year. Like, that's not a good way to go. I think the only thing you can do is say, look, this is the truth of who I am, and it will resonate with some, it won't with others. But let there be as exactly as you said, an authenticity to that gives you some relief,
Absolutely.
I think that's great advice, because I know personally, I think I can think back to a role I've had in the past where I got a role and thought, well, this is what people do in that role, and this is how you need to behave, and this is this is where you're at right now. And what that does is just create a lot of uncertainty and second guessing in yourself, because you don't know whether you're actually living up to it. Whereas you can know whether you're living up to being you, and what it is that kind of keeps you going. I think we had a good chat before this session, but I think authenticity is most likely to become a theme throughout this session. The other question that was sort of part of this theme was around the looming financial crisis has made me feel that some colleagues at work are fighting for their jobs by criticizing my output and trying to take over my responsibilities. It feels like survival of the fittest, and I don't want to compete. How do I cope?
Yeah, I mean, I can 100% relate to this. As you know, like I think a lot of creatives have been in that position, and like, our industry can be really competitive, especially when you're starting out. Once again, you know, for me, it always made sense to go back to that authenticity that you were talking about, Andy. Like, if I was comfortable with the way I behaved, then, you know, I felt like I could always be content, I guess. If there were things happening, competitiveness between teams, or if people were trying to undermine each other, I guess it didn't really fit personally for me. It didn't really, you know, fit with how I wanted to operate. So it's easier just to sort of step outside of that. And I don't think, you know, I don't think it's necessarily going to go away in our industry, but you certainly don't have to partake in it to succeed.
Mm. And there's a real volatility to it. If your metrics for how to behave and how you feel about yourself is totally outside of yourself, then that's not going to go so well. So, you know, back to what we were talking about earlier, when we talk about meditation and breathwork and things that bring you joy, the reason why they're referred to as a practice is because it's something that you do every day as an invitation to connect yourself, to your authenticity, to your truths, to your joy, so that, and maybe if you're lucky enough to have the space to do it, it's the first thing you do, and it only need be for 10 or 15 minutes in the morning, so that then when you do walk into work and you've got everybody else's energy and behaviors and thoughts and views and opinions, the root of who you are is really stabilized in terms of your own sense of self, and then the other stuff is just kind of seasonality around it, but it's not the directive for how you feel and show up.
I think that's awesome advice.
There's another question which is very industry specific that I know we've probably all been through. So this one's around the sort of the ethics of the industry, and you know, we're sort of taught that we're going to be able to come in and change the world and, you know, do things for good. And so this question says, I love being an ad creative, but recently, especially watching brands virtue signal by separating their logos while not looking after the staff in the middle of a global pandemic, brackets, I found some of the things brands do pretty hard to swallow. On the flip side, I still really believe the work we make can do great things, whether that's saving lives with a road safety campaign or just making someone smile with a funny piece of print. Any advice on navigating an industry that can do a lot of damage, like among other things, encouraging wasteful consumerism, but also one that can occasionally do a bunch of good? How do we navigate and wrestle with our beliefs and our ethics?
I think first and foremost, absolutely, our industry can do amazing things, and the power of creativity to solve problems, even on a global scale, is phenomenal. So that's really exciting, and that, I'm sure, is a lot of the reason why a lot of us get out of bed in the morning. So, you know, ideally we don't want to lose sight of that. And then in terms of what you are and aren't comfortable working on or dealing with, I think we're all going to have different boundaries. And I'll let, you know, Katie, you might want to talk a little bit more about this too. But I can say, just from an industry perspective, that I have certainly refused to work on a brand because of a personal conflict. It was a casino, and I had a family member who had a gambling problem and suffered from quite serious mental illness. And so I just outright said, no, I'm sorry. Well, I don't think I said I'm sorry. I think I just said, you know, outright no. And Katie, I know you've got some good insights into how to deal with that situation.
Well, it was just anecdotally. I mean, you're absolutely right. It is about boundaries. It's about identifying your needs, and it's about honoring them, whether it's in a relationship, in a corporate setting, in a personal setting. You must be your greatest guardian of self, so that you are not violated, whether that be even ethically working on something that you don't agree with. But yeah, we were talking about the power of no. And, you know, as an example, if either of you were to invite me, you know, if you could, to dinner tonight, I would say, oh, yes, thank you. And that would probably be it. I might ask for your advice. I wouldn't kind of go into 1,000 different explanations as to why I would love to come so much. And yet, if I were to give you a no, I would feel that I really have to kind of go into this whole narrative around why my no is a no and why it's a valid no and all the rest of it. And I think we need to empower ourselves more to, with kindness. No doesn't have to be a no. It could be just, hey, no. And it is, it's that difference between power versus force, right? One is really forceful and really less, certainly you don't want to be the recipient of, but you can say a hard no with a compassionate stance, hold your boundaries, serve yourself, and people will accept it more readily than you think.
Great answer. Great advice. And I think, that's one that I'm sure a lot of people will be really sort of heartened by as well. So I think we've actually covered most of the sort of the big themes that came up. There was one other actually that I'll mention that was I think I can answer, which someone asked, a client of theirs has asked them to cut their fees during this time. And obviously, that's a hit that you're taking immediately. And it's something that we've had to do in our business to some extent. And I think the approach I take is that, like, we both want to come out of this. That's one of the big things. Right now, some of this is survival. And so if you want to come out of it, you've got to have a discussion around what is it that's going to make it viable to be able to come out of it with. So the stance I've taken a lot of the time is that, I'll go halves with you. Like, we're in this together. So, we we'll cover half of the cost of whatever it is that we're doing. And that means that we can still see revenue coming in, and you can still see money saved. And hopefully, in a few months' time or longer, we'll both come out of this in a better place. So I think a lot of what we're about to go through is a lot of people in the same boat. And if we can actually just agree to be fair and to help each other out, then, we can potentially come out of this together. So there's some of the questions that we had beforehand. And now I'm jumping over to the questions tab in the software. You'll see as well that some of you have already started doing this, but you can also upvote questions. So I will be jumping to the ones that are at the top of the list that get the most votes. So this one, I can tell you, when we invite people into the Never Not Creative Facebook group, this is like the most popular thing that people think is one of the biggest challenges facing creatives in particular. So this question is, what is the best way to deal with the imposter syndrome? I find myself struggling with this often, and this has heavily sabotaged my creative opportunities and undermined my confidence. Maria, do you want to kick us off?
I love this question. I love this question because I have such severe imposter syndrome. And I can also hand on heart say that most of the creatives that I admire do also have the same imposter syndrome. And so I almost wonder if it's actually a good thing in some regard. It might feel like a bad thing, but in some regard, it's the thing that drives us as creatives to want to keep creating and want to keep, I guess, evolving and doing the best we can. The thing we have to balance with that imposter syndrome is just being kind with ourselves. So there's sort of, I guess there's a little bit of a dark side to that, but it is an incredibly common thing, incredibly common with creatives. And so I personally find it nice to know that I'm not alone, that other people have it, and that other people who are way more talented than me have it. I recently got promoted to ECD, and that was probably the most severe case of imposter syndrome I've ever experienced. But you know what? It didn't last too long. And, with a few close friends around me sort of saying, can you just step into it and believe in yourself and get on with it? I did so, and all is well. But It's really common, and it has a beautiful side to it as well. So I guess hold it gently, and be kind to yourself. Don't let it get the better of you if you can. Katie might have some more sound advice in terms of how you can deal with it. But
look, this is a whole session in and of itself. In fact, it's probably a couple of sessions, and it's a voice that you've probably heard it referred to as your inner critic, right? It's that aspect of you that, sorry, my power's going, that whose job it is to doubt, who is to call into question, who criticizes, who keeps you locked, who keeps you small, who keeps you diminished. And if I were to work in a therapeutic session, I would really hold a lot of curiosity around it. What are the origins of it? Whose voice is it that actually is speaking? What is it in you that is still supporting it? What is it in a cultural setting that is echoing it back? And, people talk about holism and integration, and essentially that's what it is. It's basically looking at the fact that we are all of it. We are confident and we are not confident. We are skilled and we are uncertain. And so the way to really begin, and there's a lot of different processes that you can use, but maybe the very simplest one, again, writing. If you're a creative person, give it a personality. This is what I would suggest. Give it a personality, give it a name, take a pen, hear from it. Really write everything it wants to say. When it's finished, is there any more? Well, that's why I'm horrible. Get the tone, get the flavor, get the full energy of it. Get up, go sit at a different desk in a different part of your house, come into a different part, and come into the part of you that's really confident, that's really secure, that really likes yourself. And right from there, give them a voice, give them an expression fully until they're exhausted. And then when you've got those two that are both so true and yet both so different and in conflict, you can sit from a third position and begin to, what would this one say to this one to help hold it in better balance? So I would say imposter syndrome essentially is the voice of your critic, which is something that every single one of us has. The way to start to take away some of its power is get to know it and understand it so that you can hold it with a bit more empathy, and that will begin to take the charge out of it.
Beautiful.
That's awesome. I feel like a series are coming of everyone sending in their different personalities. Wouldn't that be great to watch everyone articulate them?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So that was a great question. So thank you for that one. Here's the next question. So would you judge people for having changed their job often? And would this make you hesitant to hire them? So Maria, I think this one instantly sort of makes its way over to your court.
Yes. No, I mean, I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't judge people for having changed jobs often. I would be interested to hear what their journey has been. And that's not because I'm looking for fault. That's just because I would be intrigued to find out, why have they done all these different things? I mean, so I think as a creative, the more life experience you have, the more you bring to the table every day creatively. So it can be a really beautiful thing. And we aren't really the type of personality, often we aren't the type of personality to sit in the same job for 20, 30 years because we're restless and we're always wanting fresh perspectives and new inspiration. So I would sort of, in my opinion, it's one industry where changing jobs doesn't reflect badly on you at all.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I think you need to do with that is to be able to communicate why, have really good reasons for it. Like the only thing that is stopping someone making a sort of negative decision around that is thinking that, oh, you just can't sit still and 6 months later, all the time and investment I've put into you is gone. Whereas actually, if there's very good reasons and you're able to articulate them, then that's what I'd want to find out. I'd be with you. I think I'd be quite intrigued. I just want to know why. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't know about you. I look less and less at CVs and portfolios and stuff now. And, if something sparks my interest in what they said as they were coming in the door, then that's the thing that sort of will determine whether I'm going to speak to you for longer or not. Because we all look kind of similar on paper.
Yeah. And it's also a good opportunity to reflect back on the last question, which is that critic. If I was sat in an interview with you, Andy, and you said to me, so tell me why you've changed jobs so much, there are two different responses I could have to it. One, let's say from the loving, confident Katie, you might be like, oh, he's really interested in me. He really wants to know about my experience. The critic might go, you see, there you go. He's automatically made a judgment on you, and he's now just asked that question to trip you up so that you could fail, and he has a predetermined idea of what he wants, and you're not going to fill it, and did it. So you can begin to see how our own narrative, the stories we tell ourselves, become our reality.
It's so true, isn't it? Like, I mean, I've had these conversations very recently around if you're basically, what you're second guessing of what other people are thinking about you, and how if you go looking for like negative thoughts or negative perceptions, you can find them. Like it's very, you just have to look and you'll find them. But also they might not be real, but you're sort of making them real for yourself. So are there any other sort of techniques? Like I'd love I'm going to go back and like write my positive and my negative side, my devil and my angel almost. Are there any other things around that are good to do?
Well, look, there's a lot. One of the things that I would say to people, just to hold in your mind, is that your body always wants to maintain the status quo, even if it does not serve you. Right. And so to give you an example of that, if I drank 8 coffees a day and I was in a constant state of high anxiety, like I don't think anybody on this webcast would think that that's a good idea. Yet, if I suddenly tried to stop drinking coffee, my body would it would do everything it could do to bring me back to that state that it recognizes, right? So I'd get cracking headaches, I'd crave coffee, all the rest of it, because it wants to maintain that state, because its job is to keep me safe. And it just knows that in that state, I'm safe. That's been working. And in the same way, if you're somebody who always looks at something through a negative lens, and you always feel, and you're far more, in relationship with the devil than the angel, then it's a really big ask of yourself. And so again, I'd kind of go back a little bit to what we were talking about in the beginning, where all emotions are welcome, which is maybe the greatest tool is just awareness. Just stop and ask yourself, who is reflecting that truth, or what aspect of yourself is reflecting that back at you? That's the place to start, because once you have sight of that, then you have self-awareness. And once you have self-awareness, then you have conscious choice. And then there are lots of tools and different things that you can bring in. But the first thing to do is just to stop and create some distance between yourself and your response to this external stimuli, and hold it with some objectivity so that you can get curious about it, get to know it, and then begin to think about what you will bring in to at least hold it in equilibrium. You're not going to be able to completely disavow it because it's part of who you are, but bring it into equilibrium so that it doesn't sabotage you every time you're in a meeting with somebody who you may perceive as, more threatening or smarter, or whatever the story is you've told yourself.
And I mean, as someone who's interviewed a lot of people over the last few years, I always want the best for the person sitting in front of me, right? Like that, I'm looking for the best in them. I want to get to know them. I'm not looking for fault, and I'm not looking for them to make mistakes. And so I guess remembering that when you go into those sort of situations is useful too, I think.
Absolutely. There's another question climbing rapidly, but just before that one, I love these upvotes. So this question is a very real question right now. So as someone who has lost their job in the recent pandemic, what advice do you have for getting and staying motivated to get back on the horse and find a new gig? Katie, do you want to?
Yeah. So look, I will also start with what are your expectations of yourself? Like, what does that look like, staying motivated and getting on the horse? Does that look like you are expecting yourself to have, you know, full charged energy and constant buoyancy and optimism and be sending out 20 CVs a day? Because I would urge you to hold it. Yes, the ambition is to take steps forward, but also to make those steps each day things that are serving you and are manageable and are not going to push you further into a state of feeling that you're unable to obtain your goal. Mm-hmm. So I would start by, when you are mapping that out, go back to all of the things that we've said on this call. What is it that brings you joy, and how can you do a bit of that each day as a starter? Because that's going to hold you in the right place. Then what is it that you want to achieve today, this week, next week? And what are the aspects of you that are supporting that? And what are the aspects of you that are sabotaging that? And then get a great team around you, you know? Get a great team of friends that you trust. That doesn't have to be a lot of people. That can be 2, that can be 3. Get a really great book from somebody whose ideas really resonate with you. It can be a novel. It can be something not immediately connected, but something that you find inspirational and motivational. And just make sure that everything that you're consuming is fueling the end goal that you want to get to.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that was fast rising behind that one is a topic that I think has been coming up now for a good few years, and that's burnout. So can we talk about burnout? In an industry that seems to have different rules about what is normal hours, and we have a drive to do better and be better, how do you approach this in the workplace? How do you push your manager to help you get that work-life balance and even ask for personal leave to repair? So let's almost treat this as like a real question, because I mean, I'm sure it has been a question for you, Maria, of like people in your team who may have experienced this or in different places. Like what sort of advice would you give in terms of how they can respond to a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and it is a real problem. I just want to acknowledge that before we get into it. And I think our industry 100% operates differently to other industries. And I think, you know, personally, I'd like to see that change. And, you know, I know you would too, Andy, and you, Katie. Like, there's people that are sort of hoping and, you know, trying to change things. I think it is important to speak up and to let people know that you know, do need a little bit of space. I respect that as a manager, and look, sometimes I have to ask that myself for that time. My big sort of learning for this year, or my challenge I've set myself for this year, is self-responsibility, and what that means to me is learning to sort of, I guess, put myself first, because in reality, you can't be the best employee, the best mum, the best friend, the best partner if you're not your best self. So you can be doing your boss, your workmate, your creative partner a favor by taking a little bit of time out, because that might be what you need to come back and I guess enjoy your job and be a better you. So it's actually not. It's not a bad thing to do, and it's something I respect someone asking.
There's also, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff around burnout as well, which is people think that burnout is just related to hours and the amount of work that gets done. But I mean, you can work that number of hours and be great and happy. It's also other things, and I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Katie, around what brings you joy. And I think, you know, we've seen in the mentally healthy research that one of the big things that can lead to mental health challenges for people, and that are then inevitably linked to burnout, is finding meaning in the work that you're doing. And that doesn't always have to be like the meaning of like, who are you doing it for, or like what is the project trying to achieve, but even like, are you learning anything? Or are you feeling like you're progressing, or can you sort of look back at what you've achieved? And that's like a big part of burnout. It says, if you're doing the hours and you feel like there's no meaning in your job, that's really when everything sort of gets to the point where it's almost helpless. How do you tackle burnout with clients, Katie?
Well, first of all, it's identifying the real root causality of it. So I'll use a personal example. My own family of origin, I learned that, and I think a lot of us can probably relate to this, doing is good and being is bad. If you distill it right down to the absolute core of the belief, that was it. So what does that belief lead to? Me pushing myself to the umpteenth degree in all things, in work, in relationships. And so whilst some of it was externally real, a lot of it was also internally charged and led. And so if I had a client come to me and say, I'm feeling completely overwhelmed, I would want to go on that journey of excavation, which essentially is looking at, okay, on a surface level, this is what we think it is. How do we get to know that a little bit better? What is it in you that is also feeding into amplifying, adding to that? And how do we begin to shift that? And in some cases, it may be that this isn't the right industry for you. But in some cases, it may be a practical change, And in some cases, it may be something that you can shift in you to the energy that you are bringing to it that actually helps achieve the result, even though on the surface, it may look very similar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about what could be seen as a difficult situation, actually that situation teaching you something about yourself or giving you an opportunity to change. That does shift your perspective somewhat, doesn't it?
Look, this is probably, a lot of my answers have all been about the same thing, which is turning the eye inward. And that's because that's the work I do. That's what psychotherapy is. It is that journey of getting to know why you're responding the way you're responding, because of your sight of how you're wired the way that you're wired. And the greatest catalyst for change, I believe, is inside of yourself, because I can't control the world around me. I can't control, my relationships and my jobs and everything, what everybody else is doing. But I can kind of, through greater awareness, hold myself in a stronger position through it. And there's a lot of freedom in that, because you get to see the truth of why you feel the way you do. And it's not always outside of yourself. In fact, I would argue more often than not, a lot of it is housed within.
I think there's another part here, which is how to ask your manager. I think burnout overall is a topic that is very current right now. And our mental health overall is a topic that's very current right now as well. And I think, how do you have that conversation with your boss? I know we had someone asked a question similar to this when we did an event in Melbourne, and they had said that very quickly, and I think you actually mentioned it then, Katie, that the answer was, well, suck it up. This is the industry we're in, and maybe it's not right for you. And I guess I would like, and I know I wouldn't do that now, but I would like to see that there's a few more solutions before we get to that point for that person. And I think, there are things that you can start to do and improve in terms of the way that you ask the question. So often if you just come to your manager who's got a million things going on with hey, I'm burnt out, and so fix it for me. It's very difficult, and your manager and your business can't necessarily fix that for you and take it out of your hands. But what they can do is work on it with you. And so if you're actually going, hey, this is how I'm feeling and this is what I'm experiencing, I think these are some of the things that might be causing it. And can I work on a solution with you is a really fair question to ask, and to try and work on this together, which might start to head off that kind of response of, well, this is it, this is what you got yourself into, and if you don't like it, you might be better off elsewhere.
Yeah, and sorry, I feel I need to clarify that. What I meant by that was, again, as you attune to what you need and what serves you, it might be that, you want flexibility, you don't want the commitment of 5 days in office. It might be. So what I meant by that was less about, more about, again, just knowing yourself as an individual, and then you're able to hold that in kind of the wider balance of, some things which are more fixed, and then you can use that as rich information to do the right thing for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So here's someone looking for a job, Maria. Next
yeah.
question. What advice would you offer to someone who isn't currently in a creative role but is looking to move into one in their future but doesn't have the experience on their CV?
Yeah, it is tough, isn't it? It's tough trying to get that first bit of experience, and I think it takes a bit of determination in terms of accepting that there might be setbacks, trying to meet as many people as possible. You know what? Eventually you're going to connect with someone, which is kind of what our business is all about. We're, especially in creative, we're all emotional people. We all like to connect with each other. And I think the more people you meet, the more chance you've got of sitting across from someone who, you're just suddenly like, yeah, damn, like we totally think the same, we get along, and that person's likely to give you a shot. There's a lot of luck, and probably a heavy dose of determination, and I guess my advice would be, don't give up, and don't lose sight of the dream. It does take a little bit of effort, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. You're going to have to knock on the door, like literally have the stuff in there that is going to get, like, once you get, and I know a lot of people have this, and then salespeople in particular have this actually, which is, if I can get in the room with someone, I can sell them. And that's essentially what you've got to try and do. You've got to try and get into the room, have the conversation, because it's not about, at that point then, what was on your CV. It's about how are you having that conversation with the person that's right in front of you, and exactly like what you said, like what sort of connection are you getting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've often wondered whether that whole process prepares you a little bit for the creative process, because one of my first bosses, Richard Maddox, who is and was an incredible boss, said to me early on, being a creative is 99% rejection. Like, you're going to get one out of every 100 ideas that get sold, which might be a slight dramatization, but there is a certain level of resilience, and there's an interesting tension there as a creative person, because we're often quite empathetic. We feel things, we think about things quite deeply, and then we're thrown into an environment where you are required to handle setbacks, to be resilient. So I think navigating that tension in yourself, and that sort of walking that fine line is a big part of being a creative.
Yeah, excellent. So here is another very real one, I think. And I'll just sort of make a point that we are at, what are we at here? It's about seven minutes left. So this one is about supporting others, and I actually put a few links into the chat just a few minutes ago that has some resources on mentally healthy that are worth checking out, and one of them was directly related to something like this. So my partner works in the fitness industry and is currently out of work. He's been a great mentor and friend to others by checking in on their mental health, but I feel like his mental well-being is being affected. He's quite anxious and stressed, but won't admit it. What can I do to help or support him? That would be, I mean, Katie, great one for you to help.
Yeah, great question. Look, I think the challenge for all of us with every journey, but specifically for our journey with our mental health, is there is a divine timing to it. You have to get to a place in your struggle that you want change. And I use the word struggle because that would suggest that you're doing something which is uncomfortable for you, or there is something about how you're feeling that you want to shift. And so you can certainly invite the discussion with him and ask him questions about how he is. But if he is not at that place where he is wanting to convert, or maybe have that conversation with you, maybe he has his own thoughts around how he might want to do that. So my advice would be that, it's not your journey to hold, it's his journey to hold. And it's really important that you have your boundaries around that, and that you allow him to have his, that you remind him that you're here, you're present, that you love him, and you absolutely could be part of that team when he feels that the time is right. And then also to make space for normal day-to-day life, so that you're not hounding the conversation constantly if it's not being met. And you might actually find that in that place where you seemingly think you are just kind of relaxing or making dinner or chatting or just relating in a more normalized way, that's where the space that he may feel more comfortable to open up.
I feel like you just described me. So in all honesty, I'm obviously, I do quite a bit of work at the moment around, and not being an expert, but being passionate about it. Obviously the mental health space, particularly in our industry, but and I'm very open about talking to others. But when it comes to my partner potentially talking to me about it, I can shut down very, very quickly. And I feel like it's almost because it becomes a thing, and it's like, oh, we have to talk about the thing now. And it's always at a time when I don't want to talk about the thing now. But I think like what you were saying towards the end there, just almost like finding, sometimes there's cracks that you can almost go, oh, there might be a way in there. And it doesn't have to mean that that's the time where you go, right, let's talk about your mental health. It's more about the time that's like, oh, well, you might be able to start to sort of eke away at something to go, oh, well, I just, this is a great time to talk about how you're feeling. It's like, or, that's great advice that you gave to so-and-so. It's great that you're helping those other people. Is that taking its toll on you? Because I see my mental health sometimes as I'm better at it when I work at it as a project, almost, rather than actually something that's me. It's like, if I can get outside of myself and treat it like a project, I find it much easier. And everyone is different, of course. But I think, that was a great way of explaining it, and very, very hard to do for people that don't want to talk, but you do got to keep trying, not nagging. I would say.
Yeah, I can relate to being the person who wants to help or fix people, and that's that puts a lot of pressure on the other person, and I think learning to just show up in a loving way, and not necessarily even discuss or bring up the subject of mental health, but just actions, I guess, being supportive and being loving can be of more value than trying to help, because the help can sometimes add extra pressure to a person who's already putting themselves under huge amounts of pressure. But I mean, in that situation myself, I've learnt more about my own desire to help or fix people, and that's probably something that's worth looking at and working on, as well, rather than worrying too much about the partner who's suffering from mental health issues. It's like, why am I feeling like I need to fix this? Would be an interesting thing to kind of look at.
And sometimes as well, the motivation is right, but the expression is slightly off. And if your motivation is to support him and to love him and to help him in a time that you can see that he is not his fullest self, maybe the simplicity of, I don't know what that looks like for you, but a movie or dinner or sharing a glass of wine or just creating some lightness, that in itself is doing that. And arguably better than, can we talk about it now? Can we talk about it now? Can we talk about it when he's clearly saying no?
No, yeah.
So true, yeah. All right, I think we've got time for one last question. And the one that is at the top is, I mean, I wish I had an answer to this. As a freelancer, I'm feeling really on the outside of the agency support system and sort of information and insight. Are you guys still looking at projects? Do you think we'll be back to making things when we start moving out of this total lockdown? So, Maria, if you wouldn't mind just peeking into the crystal ball for a second.
Yeah.
This is a tough one.
And I am optimistic by nature. You might have gathered that already. So, of course, there's no one wants this to continue any longer than it has to. And, I know in New Zealand, our government is doing all it can to try and kind of get on top of this situation as quickly as possible so we can start rebuilding, which is awesome. So I think it is tough being a freelancer, 100% acknowledge that. You are kind of out of the loop somewhat, but things are going to ramp up, I think. And look, I don't have a crystal ball, but I am optimistic. Things are going to ramp up and it's all going to be back on and it's going to be fast. And you know what, we might come back to agency life with a different perspective. Right now, our agency is operating with 130 people and no building, right? Operating quite efficiently, churning out the same quality of work. So that's raising questions in my mind. So I think there'll be things we learn from this experience. Personally, I'm enjoying working from home and having time with my son, more time than I'm used to. So I think all of us are going to learn from this experience, take the good bits, and I guess move forward as quickly as we possibly can. So we might all end up being freelancers. We might all end up working more remotely. It really is anyone's guess at this stage, but I think that things are going to ramp up quite quickly, and there will be work on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when work starts to come back, the workforce may have changed. So actually, freelancers could be in a position that is almost better off at that point. And so, working out what your freelance offer is, perfecting how you sell yourself right now is a good idea to be able to kind of take advantage of that when it does come back. So, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all going to be still creating stuff after this. Like the world needs it. It is something that is always going to be required. It's just it's going to have to take a little break for a little while.
And there may be things that that our countries can bring to the table for the rest of the world also. Like different countries might come out of this crisis, pandemic, opportunity, whatever you want to see it, with different at different times. For example, Australia and New Zealand might get back on their feet sooner and be able to shoot television ads, for example, where the States have got no ability to do so. So there might end up being, for freelancers, the chance to do global work as well. So, where there's a crisis, there is an opportunity. I think, I'd encourage everyone to think about what could possibly change as a result of what we're going through right now in terms of the positive outcomes.
Yeah. Well, finishing positive is good. So I think that is a good way. Thank you for helping us to finish on that positive note. So I guess I'd like to sort of finish by saying thanks to both of you, because this is the first time we've ever done it, and I think it's gone fairly well.
It's fun.
So thank you very much. It was so easy talking to you. Hopefully people feel like we were able to answer some of their questions. We will do a write-up of this. We will try and get some of these questions and some of the basic answers up, and also the recording. But thank you both. And we will be back next month with another creative and a psychologist. And it's going to be great to be able to sort of bring that back to you. So any stuff in the meantime, Phil, you can email me at hello@nevernotcreative.org. You can jump on the website. And I'm sure, there are Youngbloods Facebook groups. There's a mentally healthy site as well. So, and there's a Never Not Creative Facebook group. So you're not alone during this period. Definitely reach out, find your groups and your communities. And we're here to help and support. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.